Okay, let me call to order the Fox Canyon Groundwater Management Agency meeting for May 22nd. If you'll please rise. John, if you'll lead us.
Please follow me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, all right, thank you. Okay, roll call, please.
Chair Mahart?
Here.
Director Craven?
Here.
Director Zaragoza?
Here.
Director Kelly?
Here.
Director Borchard?
Here.
Okay, Dan Nauman's an alternate. He's in the audience. And that's the only alternate I see. Okay, agenda review. Jeff?
One item of change to note on item 3, page 2 of 4.
Item 3, wage 2 of 4. Okay.
Second paragraph from the bottom.
Okay.
Last sentence. It says third quarter PWAC performance reflected 80% at the 75% benchmark. It should say 60% at the 75% benchmark.
Okay.
And that's it.
Okay, and item 7, right, we're going to pull that off the agenda, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so item 7.
You heard on that?
What's that? Yeah, well, I'll do that in a second. So,
Mr. Chairman, can I ask? I spent too damn many hours reading that nonsense.
yeah. Okay, here's the answer. Late last week, Jeff received a letter from Charlotte that she wanted to send to me, but because of the Brown Act, it went to Jeff. And it raised some questions that, and I'm not trying to put words in her mouth, but essentially what she said in the letter is she's thought about what we had talked about at the last executive committee meeting, and she has questions on why we're doing it this way. She wants clarification. And Jeff has raised some questions. And so given the fact that there's no time frame in which to deal with her questions without going through this big board process, I had said at that committee meeting that it would be on the agenda, that we would deal with it on the agenda unless there was some hiccups along the way, either individuals or groups or whatever raised questions. Then I reserve the right to roll it on the agenda so that we try to follow the formula that we said we're going to try to deal with it and get consensus at the committee level rather than going through a long, protracted back and forth at the board meeting. So given the fact that I was out of town, I didn't get to deal with the issue until Thursday or Friday of last week, whatever it was, and given the fact that we could not get a committee meeting in time and then figure out what the solution was and then put it on the agenda, what I directed staff to do was to take it off the agenda. Let's do the committee meeting, and we'll deal with it at the subsequent board meeting. Now I recognize, so that's how it came down. Now I recognize there's all kinds of folks that say, hey, we got to get this thing signed. Well, the truth of the matter is no city has approved it yet. No other water agency has approved it yet. It's 18 months before it's going to be built. I understand time is of the essence. I think we've pushed ourselves very quickly on this. But when a board member raises questions after having sat through the committee meeting and says, I have second thoughts about what we had talked about and I want some clarifying issues, I think in the abundance of caution, we haven't lost any real time. We'll deal with the issue at a subsequent committee meeting, and I think it's being respectful of our right as board members to ask questions, staff to ask questions, and to try to race a solution through. There's just no time to do that. So
I would just ask you, Mr. Chairman, to maybe have pinned us a note so that I didn't spend my weekend reading the whole thing.
I apologize for that. So anyway, that's how it went down. So if somebody wants to speak to those questions, but that's a summary of what decisions that went down. Anyway, John, did you want to speak?
Well, I can do public comment.
Okay. All right. So we have two changes to the agenda, item 7 coming off and the change to item 3. Can I have a motion?
Move to approve the agenda as amended.
Second.
Motion is second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Hearing none. All right. We have public comments. Opportunity for the public to address the board.
Good afternoon, John Matthews, Pleasant Valley County Water District. I feel like we've been here at least a couple of months. I appreciate Chair Mulhart's comments on this. I would comment before I make my formal comments that if you were frustrated reading it, you should have drafted it, because that took a long time. We spent nearly a year drafting that. My comments today are my own, but I am going to give you some comments I've gotten from people because I asked them if I could. The individuals to the contract, other than the City of Oxnard, are Pleasant Valley, United, Casey Howling, Ryder Affiliated, and Southland Sod, Jurgen Gramco. I got a call this morning from James Dubois, who flew in from outside the country so he could be here today. To say that he was disappointed, frustrated, a bit angry that this wasn't going forward today. He has attended all the executive committee meetings, as I have. I appreciate the way that we've conducted those executive committees. I think we've had good discussions. I'm fearful that at some point in time, this isn't going to get to us because people are going to have questions. I would assume that the other three directors that have not attended that executive committee are going to have questions, and I hope that just doesn't continue to kick the can down the road. You all go dark in August, and if we weren't swimming in water right now, I'd really be mad. You know, if we hadn't had such torrential rains the last couple of years, I'd really be mad that we're putting this off. Again, I want to remind the board, this is to agriculture, which we just had a meeting with United where they're not going to have a fall release this year, 5,000 acre-feet of water. Now, if there's any farmer you find out there that says they wouldn't welcome 5,000 acre-feet, I want to meet them because I want to talk to them and I want to convince them otherwise. We have to get this water out there. There's not a decision, in my mind, that you'll all make this year that's more important than approving this project. With regard to Chair Mulhart's comments about no one has approved it yet, the reason they haven't approved it is because you guys haven't approved it. We were ready to approve it back in December. The city was ready to approve it back in December. The three private entities were ready to do it in December. And to think that I don't know if you ever watched The Price is Right, but they have a game where they have a moving thing and you try and stay in the middle of it. To think that by kicking this month after month, that you've got 18 months that's going to compress and they're going to be able to build it in 15 months, it's just not going to happen. That 18 months is going to be put out. So we're not saying there's no pipeline there. Yeah, we can't get the water today. Agreed. I'd be the first to agree with that. But when you act on that and everyone else acts on it, then we start the clock for the 18 months. I can tell you there's somebody here that's not here today, in addition to James Dubois, and that's Rob Saperstein. And I asked Rob if I could mention this today. I talked to Rob. He's the first one that advised me on Friday, late, with an email. Then I talked to him on Monday. I talked to him Tuesday. I talked to him today, and I begged him to come here. And he said no. He feels disrespected. I agree with him, despite the good efforts that's been done here. That no one called him. He hasn't talked to anybody about this being off the agenda. He found out about it, says, I'm not coming. I don't blame him. I'm here to tell you we've got to move this along. I agree with Lynn 100%. You don't want to do things that are stupid. Part of the agreement, if you read it, has a 2-year beta period where we test it. We find out what are the flaws in it, where the push points are. We expect the GMA to have comments on that as we go through that process. We expect the growers. We expect the city to have comments. It's my word to you, for whatever it's worth, other than Chair Mulhart. I attended the first GMA meeting. I don't know how many years ago that was, but it was a long time ago, Lynn. And I've always liked the way we conduct this stuff. This is one where I think we've got to move this along. I would suggest you put it back on the agenda today, although nobody's here because they're so angry, or you set a special meeting and let's get this thing done. I'm just shocked that you don't have farmers in here that are just screaming and yelling, saying, we need this water. When they've been told basically that in the PTP area, that you're very familiar with, that they may only get 50% of the water. Well, okay, what do? We pump our wells? Well, I thought the whole purpose of this was to save the aquifers. That's what this program is for. That's what PV's always taken the position. I don't care who gets the water. I don't care if PV doesn't get one single drop of this water, and that's the truth. Because it'll be used by people who are not pumping their wells. Dave Sosa's sitting up there telling you right now, we're pumping our wells in May. All of our wells, which we generally don't do till August. I don't want to be there in 2014. I certainly don't want to be there in 2015. This 18-month ain't going away. The city's told us very distinctly, we're not moving forward. We're not doing design. We're not building because we don't have the approval. I don't blame them. I beg them, and let's just keep going, assuming we're going to get approval. But I'm just, it would seem to me that it would behoove us to have an executive committee meeting tomorrow. I know we can't do that, but have a special meeting and get this thing. I don't think we're going to solve it at the next meeting, frankly. I think Director Kelly and Director Borchard and Director Bennett, who have not sat through those, may have some questions. And that's good. The public may have questions about it. I would hope that we try and answer those, that those criticisms and concerns will be addressed, and that we'll act on it that day. Just get an up or down vote so that the city can move forward and so that we out on the Oxnard Plain can solve the overdraft problem, or start to solve. This will not solve it. I think that's clear. This will not solve it. I said it.
John,
I'm sorry.
let me stop. I'm not going to get into a discussion today about the agreement. The decision's been made that we're not going to discuss it today, and I don't want to get into discussion of the agreement because then it just starts doing that. We're not going to do that. So I do take exception to some of the remarks, and you and I go back a long ways. We've been dealing with this issue for a long time. I said at that committee meeting, I was very clear at that committee meeting, get it on the agenda. If there's no hiccups to, as we agreed to it, it would be on the agenda. We didn't get that. This is a public agency. We have to do the process, and we're going to do it right. And I accept the fact it's not pretty. The fact of the matter is that we've moved faster on this issue than any issue we have in my time frame in this agency. I don't agree with your characterization that you guys were ready to act in, I do agree with your characterization that you guys were ready to act in December. The fact of the matter is that the GMA and United were brought in late in the game that we complained about. So we're going to work it through the process. I am hopeful that when we get it before the board, we don't have a protracted discussion. And if we have to have additional meetings and special meetings, I said I would do that. I apologize that some people weren't notified. But the fact of the matter is, I said it very clearly at the committee meeting, that if we have an agreement, we'll deal with it today. If we don't have an agreement, I reserve the right to take it off the agenda, and that's what we did. So when a board member who was at the committee has second thoughts about what they read, I don't have a forum in which to pick up the phone and say, hey, what's the problem? Hey, how do we do that? This is a public agency, and we got to go through the process. So we're going to go through the process. We're going to deal with it as quickly as we can. And the truth of the matter is that it will get done. And it's not going to be pretty. I accept that. But to put the burden of the whole aquifer and the future on this agency, because we didn't act within a 3-month, 4-month time frame when you guys had 2 years, 3 years, when the whole GREAT program has been on the agenda for 10 years, and we had to fight to get it in front of us so we could look at it before it was brought to us. I don't accept the characterization that this agency is holding it up. We will deal with it in the time frame when it's done, and we'll do it as quickly as we can.
Mr. Chair.
Well,
Yes,
Go ahead.
ma'am.
Yeah, it was my comments that delayed this, and so I'd like to explain. If we're going to have another committee meeting, I would like whatever it is we're talking about in my hands at least 72 hours before the committee meeting. I don't want it handed to me at the table with changes from what I might have seen before. If people who are involved are asking for significant changes in what's handed to us, I think they need to expect, at least from me, for me to say we need to, because that's what happened at this meeting. There were big changes, and I'm going to need time to think about it. I'm not a fast thinker, so that's all I want to say about my comments.
Well, I disagree with that characterization. I've known you for a long time, and I don't think you got to...
It's difficult for me to think about details. The big picture I might be able to think about quickly, but when you everybody starts throwing changes in details, it's difficult for me to think about it. It really is.
Believe me,
On the
I
spot.
appreciate that, because if you're a slow thinker, I'm glacially. It is hard to digest this. It did take a long time to draft this. A lot of thought went into it. My point being is that I would expect the other people on the board to have similar issues, because they're not attending the executive committee because of the Brown Act. Hopefully it doesn't go into June. It's a little disturbing to me, to be honest with you. As friend to friend, when you start lecturing, like, I don't know what public agencies do, and that I haven't been involved in this agency, that disturbs me, and that's the kind of stuff that I think has kept Rob away from here today. And I just think Lynn, I think it's wrong. You did make that clear. But I'm to the point now where I don't care if the hiccup occurs publicly here, publicly on the moon. We've got to get this thing done.
John, I appreciate your passion. I appreciate your sense of urgency to get this done. We will get it done. We're going to set up a committee, the executive committee meeting. Charlotte has defined how much time frame she needs to review stuff. I hope other committees get their information in advance so they have a chance to study it. We set up a committee process such that at least we can get two directors to understand what the issue is, so that we can then bring it and give some kind of guidance that we've had lengthy discussion at the board level to try to short circuit this process so it doesn't go on forever. That was the program that we laid out almost 8 months, 9 months ago, whatever, a year ago, I don't know. We're going to follow that process. I'm sorry that it didn't fall in place as everybody intended today, but we will move it on. I don't see any reason to delay it. I agree with you. It will get done. We're going to get it done as quick as we can. I reserve the right to call a special board meeting if necessary to deal with that one issue. That's still on the table. That's still a possibility. But we're going to do it in sequence. And my hope would be that by the January meeting, we'll have all these little issues worked out, and then the full board will have a chance to look at it.
Don't give me a heart
January?
attack.
Not January, June.
Well, you had me. I was just about ready to have the big one. I was about ready to,
I'm 3 days away from turning 65, and myself. Reddy is ahead of me by, right? You're ahead of me by 3 days?
3 days, yeah.
3 days. It's your birthday today.
No, 2 days ago.
Happy birthday. Right?
Mr. Chair, the next meeting is the 26th of June, is that?
I believe so, yeah. All right.
Well, I've said
John,
what I was going to say.
we're going to go around and around, and we've heard, and I apologize for the notification, but this, in my opinion, for this item, the way it is currently in front of us with the issue that a board member has raised was the right decision. Maybe we didn't execute it correctly for all those involved, and for that I apologize. So
No apology needed. I mean, I understand. You've heard me at the United meetings. You're going to hear me forever. And one other thing I just want to make. I don't want to belabor this, but the thought with, I know that there was a real sticking point, as you know, with United and the GMA being brought in early. That was a decision on the group's part. We wanted to get everything in place, get everybody on board, and then bring it to you. Right or wrong, I have no problems with United and the GMA coming in earlier. I am going to continue to have. Hopefully I'm not up here next month making the same statement I made in April and March.
I can't take it next
You
month.
can't take it. You'll be flying someplace.
You've succeeded in raising my blood pressure so I don't have to sit through this passion speech again. So we'll do what we can.
Thanks.
Thanks, John. Yes, ma'am. Ready. And then Dale.
Good afternoon, Chair, members of the board. Reddy Pakala with Water and Sanitation Department, the Public Works Agency. I do not want to raise anybody's blood pressure.
Thank you.
This is just an informational item. This is also about another water supply project in the Las Posas Valley. A few months ago, I came before you and made a presentation about the pilot well test for the Moore Park desalter project. At that time, I was asked when would the modeling work be completed and brought back. I said by June of this year. Last month, we met with CDPH, California Department of Public Health. That's the agency who would approve our project for the water supply purposes so that they could include in our water supply permit. We had a very constructive, positive meeting with the CDPHS, and they have asked for more data. So it's going to take us another 6 to 12 months for us to get that information. I just want you to be aware, I won't be able to bring that to you in June of this year, as I told you, but as soon as we have all the information that's needed, we will bring it forward through LPUG to your board.
Okay,
Thank
thanks,
you.
Freddie. And by the way, happy birthday. I will not make the group sing for you, so.
Okay, thank you.
Dale. Andy Waters came in as an alternate. Yes,
Okay.
ma'am.
Dale Zarowski, representing the Farm Bureau, and unfortunately, this may make your blood pressure go back up. I'm also disappointed the item was removed from the agenda, and I believe if you look at item D for agenda view, it says consider and approve by majority vote any item added or removed from the agenda. So you need a majority vote to remove this item from the agenda, and on behalf of the farmers, I think it should be discussed. I understand that Supervisor Craven had some questions about it, but I think the intent of the Brown Act is that those kind of questions are actually come up in a meeting like this, since not all of us can go to the executive committee meeting. So I think you should have a public debate on it. Thank you.
And answer your question, with regards to approving the agenda, there was a roll call, and there were 5 ayes to amend the agenda with item 7 removed and with the little change to item 3. So we did do that. Okay. All right. Anybody else? Okay. Board member comments?
Mr. Chairman, I'm just wondering if we're going to be provided a red line copy so we can understand the depth and significance of changes that are going to be made.
Okay. There's direction. Okay.
Certainly.
Comes time.
Any changes moving forward, we can do that.
Yes.
In addition, if there's going to be a special meeting set, and I have no problem with that, let's try and get some advance notice so we can kind of make sure we're all there.
So far, my understanding is no special board meeting has been set. I think the sequence of events, we ought to have unless I hear otherwise, we will have the executive committee deal with it. That's the committee that's dealing with it now. And then out of that meeting, if we can get that done and get it resolved, then we'll make a determination at that point whether given the time frame we are to the regular meeting, or if we're well ahead of that, we can do it as a special meeting. It may be that we'll do it at a special meeting anyway, just because it'll be a one agenda item, so we have time to talk about it. So I'm open to all those issues. But the first thing we got to do is we got to get an executive committee meeting to deal with this issue and answer some of the questions that Charlotte has raised and some of the questions that Jeff has raised. Okay? Again, my intent is to move it along and not to hold it up, but we're going to do it in the proper sequence. Okay, we have consent items 1, 2, 3.
Move the approval.
Motion to approve.
Second.
And a second. All in favor? Aye. Hearing none, so approved. Informational items, let's deal with item number 4.
Good afternoon, Chairman Mulhart and directors. For the record, my name is Kathleen Rydell, and I'm here in regards to an update to the Las Posas Basin Users Group meeting. Today was the first meeting since the last FCGMA board meeting. Today at the meeting, staff and directors attended. Some of the items that were discussed at the meeting today was a possible use of the HSPF model to augment the Las Posas Basin water budget estimates, the Las Posas Basin groundwater export policy committee. There was an update as to their progress. There was a discussion on M&I to M&I historical groundwater allocation transfer, as well as M&I to ag. There was a discussion there. And there was a discussion of the water use projections for the basin-specific groundwater management plan. And pulled from their agenda was the ASR test results. So Chairman Robert Aranio will give you more details on the meeting today.
Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon, Board Chair, members of the Board. Robert Aranio, Crestview Mutual, and also Chairman of the Las Posas Basin Users Group. As Kathleen iterated and reported to you, I consider today pretty much a house cleaning day in what we were able to accomplish and what we got done on our agenda. There's been reports that have been submitted that we needed to take a look at. There was requests for information to be incorporated into the management plan that we had to evaluate as to the validity of the information that we would be using and and our ability to quantify what are the groundwater supplies to the basin, and whether or not those new tools would be useful in us being able to incorporate those. And so there was letters that were written back and forth, and those letters were then discussed as to the logic behind them in the forum, so that everyone could ask questions as to what our thinking is and whether or not we were going to use, in particular, the HSPF surface water rain model for our process, which we have decided not to. As Kathleen spoke about, there is also, in the interest of full disclosure, Crestview and Solano Verde will be putting a request before the GMA in order to move a groundwater allocation, M&I to M&I, within the same basin. And that was brought up at the Las Posas Basin Users Group today for discussion and to see if there was any concerns that came out of that. And then finally, or additionally, I should say, there was our first attempt in trying to deal with the issue from last month about expanded groundwater use within the basin. And our belief that there was already existing language within the ordinance that addressed this issue. Subsequent to that, the discussions that came out of it, GMA staff is asking for us to put a finer point on our request to you, and specifically proposed language that we would like to see made to the ordinance to address this issue as we understand it. And so in the next month, we will be moving forward with that in order to get that letter out and get group buy-in for it before we submit it to you.
Okay.
As Kathleen said, we did have to roll one item off the agenda because of lack of time. The amount of discussion that went on with the other issues simply compressed our schedule, that it wasn't enough time in order to adequately review the subject matter. And so lastly was, as we've been putting out our draft proposals or draft management plans, Chapter 3 has to do with land use issues. And there's been a lot of debate about what is future land use going to be in the Las Posas Basin. We've quantified that there's as much as 11,000 acres of land that is currently undeveloped and not in production. And so as we take a look at our crystal ball going out X years, what is the future for that? What can we expect that anticipated demands might be on there? And do we need to factor that in for our long-term viability of our basin management plan in there?
There's 11,000 acres of additional land that could come into ag?
That is currently not being used or is fallow. Whether it goes into ag, whether it goes into M&I, whether it stays fallow is unknown. But there was a lot of requests that came out of version 2 that you saw and that staff saw for us to clarify that as to what are the possibilities and what could be the anticipated demands on those areas if they were to come into production, and what impact could that have on the basin. So there was a discussion on that, and Dr. Steve Bachman led that part of the discussion. He has come up with a very creative way that I happen to agree with as to taking a look, not what's going to happen, but if it happens, what's going to be the impact. We don't have the ability, we don't have a crystal ball so fine to be able to say that over the next 10 years, 1,000 acres are going to be put in production. We have no idea about that. Really, we don't know. But if 1,000 acres did come into production, what could you expect would happen? to the basin demand, is how that was decided to be approached. And
Just an order of magnitude. Currently, what's the current land acreage that's currently?
Okay. So the way he approached the problem was similar but different.
Okay.
He took a look at how much land came into production between 1997 and 2010. Why? There's good photographs. You can look at trees and you can tell what's a tree, you can tell what's a hoop, you can tell what's fallow land and what kind they are. So over that 13-year period, he was able to quantify that 1,250 acres have come into production, roughly 100 acres a year. And because of the crops or agricultural practices that are on there, he's able to come up with what is a water demand. And on that 1,250 acres, you're looking between 1,900 and 3,100 acre feet of new demand came onto the basin in that 13-year period. That's a significant number that we need to be aware of. And we can assume that if patterns continue, for every 1,200 acres that come online, the demand might be about 3,000 acre feet a year. What we found interesting and what we've asked to go back and take a look at is while that new demand came on the system, ag has become more efficient in how they use water. Some of them have become more intensive in how much crops are grown for each acre. So what has been the actual impact in pumping? And I think my own idea, what's going to show is that while they become more efficient, they become more intensive, the lands come into use, but it's been a push. And that you won't see pumping demands going up commensurate with the lands coming into production. And so that's a good thing for us in what we're looking at. But still, we need to quantify that better and get a handle on that for our next version that's coming out to you.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Anybody have any questions? Anybody in the audience, any questions? All right. Thanks.
Thank you.
I was also at the meeting, just a few things to add. We had a lengthy discussion on the letter that they were going to send to the GMA, and really at the heart of the discussion is, do you want to provide a recommendation to the GMA, or do you want to provide a problem to the GMA? Because as it was coming, it was going to be something that the GMA would have to deal with, an issue, a particular issue. And I think that I tried to reflect what I believe to be your board's viewpoint, is that those issues should be wrestled at LPUG and then brought back with a recommendation. So I think that that's going to happen in this particular case. But there was a lot of discussion around that, and it didn't seem as clear to everyone around the table as it did to me that that might be the best way to approach it. My point to them was that if you didn't get it done there and you brought it to the board for discussion, you just had to travel a little further and come and do it here. And so I think that they're going back, they're going to come back with the recommendation. And part of that discussion also showed how pregnant some of these issues are. It's easy to shoot from the hip and create this simple solution. It doesn't take into account this complex ordinance that we've built over the years and sort of in bits and spurts, if you will. And so there was a lot of healthy discussion there where it showed that maybe some of the unintended consequences of the original plan or even the original idea. So I thought, for my own part, that their discussion on that was very educational to a lot of them. So the reason I bring it up is that I just want to make sure I'm consistent with your board's. My read of your board's direction when they set up LPUG was that LPUG could wrestle with some of these issues and bring recommendations back.
Mr. Chairman, may I comment on that? There are some others of us that were there also. The problem that I saw with Exec Officer Pratt's enunciation of the issue specifically was M&I transfers, and that's an agency-wide issue, and I think it's inappropriate to feel that LPUG should solve that issue, and then it's going to affect the agency as a whole, and ultimately has to be the agency as a whole's decision, not LPUG's decision. LPUG would be totally correct, and it would be totally correct to ask them to make a recommendation. But to ask them to come here with a definitive final answer on behalf of the entire agency, I think it's inappropriate.
Okay. Dave? Charlotte? John?
May I address that? Yeah, we're doing it in the context of LPUG. Nobody's asked for a basin, an agency-wide solution. It's really, we understand this is a basin-specific plan. We're looking for basin-specific recommendations, and we realize...
Would you suggest then that we have a different principle for M&I transfers in LPUG rather than Oxnard Plains?
I think that remains to be determined based on the basin plans and your initial assumptions in the basin plan. For example, your assumption that the basin doesn't have a water shortage, it's a water quality, colors everything that you do there, and you may come up with a different solution where that isn't the case, right? So I don't know. That's it.
I guess off the top of my head, I would say that you're both right and you're both wrong. That's pretty good. John,
I could expect none other.
You see how I just did that without even blinking an eye? I think that the fundamental position we've taken is that we're going to have to manage the aquifers on a basin-specific basis. And because of that, we've assigned the task to that basin to figure out collectively amongst yourself how you want to solve this particular problem. I do agree with Mike that there are certain issues that have ramifications that could be global in context rather than specific in context. Whatever decision is made by LPUG is going to have to go through some review process here, a GMA review process. So I think the answer would be that the first step is if this is an issue that has long-term effect on how you manage the LPUG area, I think the LPUG group needs to take the first cut at it and come up with a working solution that solves their specific problem. And their specific organization right now includes M&I and Ag and the whole smorgasbord of folks that are going to be impacted with water are at the table. If they can come to an agreement on how it impacts their area, and they believe that that is the best thing for their area, I think they ought to make that recommendation. Now it's going to go through the next step. And the next step is that we've got to figure out how to put it into the document, be consistent with what we're doing, and not create an unintended consequence that somehow that becomes the law of the land in another area that doesn't apply. So I think the two forums are not in disagreement. I think the two forums have to do what their job is. First thing is, the LPUG group has been tasked with trying to solve their collective problem with the group that they have and say, this is how it works for us. Then it has to come to the GMA if we're going to amend the ordinance. We have to make sure that if we do it to a specific section, we don't create either a global reaction or a precedent that may interfere with something somebody's going to do at some future time. And then this forum would allow folks outside the boundary of LPUG who are looking at the ordinance that we are collectively in to say, okay, we would agree that that works for them, but it doesn't work for us. And so it may be, Mike, that it's a two-step process. It may be that the GMA is going to have to weigh in on it, as the group has talked about. But I think Jeff is right. The first step ought to be at the LPUG area, and the second cut is going to have to be at the GMA area. And I don't know how you'd solve that otherwise. Otherwise, everybody in the county has to be at some of these areas.
My only point, Mr. Chairman, of course, this was an M&I question, and there's significantly more M&I in other places other than Las Posas. It's a very minimal thing, and therefore I don't think it's appropriate, though, to develop widely different things, because what happens if you're somebody on the boundary between the two? So the north half of your property will be decided by an LPUG decision, and your south half will be by the PV decision. And so we have to watch that we don't cause us to completely reverse things out. That's my only point. And I wish to end it there, because otherwise we'll be here all day.
Okay. All righty. Very good. Anybody else on this item? Let's go to item number, we got to receive and file.
Move to receive and file.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed, hearing none. Number 5.
Chair Mulhart, board members, members of the audience, Gerhard Hubner, Watershed Protection District. I'll be just introducing this item. As you know, these are the regular status updates we do on our Groundwater Supply and Enhancement Assistant Program, or our grant program. You've heard a number of reports already. This is number 4 in the series. Today I'd like to introduce Henry Gromlich, who will provide an update on the efforts with this particular grant project. Henry.
Henry.
Thank you, Gerhard. Good afternoon, Chair Mulhart, members of the board. For the record, Henry Gromlich with Cayugas Municipal Water District, but today speaking to you on behalf of the stakeholders implementing TMDLs in the Cayugas Creek watershed. And this framework for recycled water, salts, and nutrient management plan is a GSAP grant that your board offered, and the TMDL parties are providing the matching funds. And so this presentation, I'm going to briefly go through and discuss some of the salient points about the salts and nutrient management plans, and be here to answer any questions that you may have.
By the way, when I first saw that, I thought maybe that was like the rocket re-entering space, or the rocket leaving space, and then I realized, oh, it's a salt shaker. So.
Well, it's a very dynamic presentation all the way through, so you're going to love it, I'm sure.
My hat's
Dynamic
off.
salt shaker.
Yeah, my hat's off to the graphic artists. So.
Well, as I consider coming before you, the question that first posed itself to me is why you would even care about a salts and nutrient management plan. It sounds technical and kind of vaguely boring, and not a lot to do with groundwater overdraft in the GMA. I'd like to address that a little bit. I'd also like to explain why the parties thought a regional framework would help resolve some of the issues that are inherent in a salts and nutrient management plan. Finally, how is this going to further the agency's goals, and where we go from here. And before we go on, the stakeholders I've listed on this slide, they include Camarosa Water District, Camarillo Sanitary District, City of Camarillo, City of Moore Park, City of Oxnard, City of Simi Valley, City of Thousand Oaks, County of Ventura, Ventura County Waterworks District Number 1, U.S. Department of Navy, Caltrans, and the Ventura County Agricultural Irrigated Lands Group. And in the audience, we have Lucy McGovern, John Matthews, Ray Piccola, Gerhardt, and Dale Zarowski, Gerhardt Hubner and Dale Zarowski, who regularly participate with the TMDL parties in trying to solve water quality issues that can best be addressed on a watershed scale. So back to the first question, why would the GMA be interested in salts and nutrient management plans at all? And one of the current strategies on the supply side that your board has adopted in its groundwater management plan is to encourage the use of wastewater reclamation and recycled water to augment supplies within the GMA. And that seems like a fairly straightforward goal to have. The State Water Resources Control Board also developed a state recycled water policy. And that policy also has a similar goal to encourage the development of recycled water in order to augment the state's supplies for water resources. And some of the explicit goals of that policy was to try to streamline recycled water policies, expedite the implementation, while at the same time fully implement state and federal water quality laws. And these twin goals of both developing recycled water and meeting the state and federal water quality objectives are at the essence of what a salts and nutrient management plan, with the final goal that we should try to put the water states of the state to the fullest use of which they're capable. Just a little brief primer here on what we're talking about when we talk about salts loading. And this diagram here, I'm missing my special pointer.
Well, this might work for you.
Oh, here it is.
Oh.
I found it. I bring a powerful pointer to the GMA. this illustration of salt loading is very much what we have in the Cayugas Creek watershed, in which we have a series of basins, and at the very top
Charlotte,
of our...
he's got the laser pointer on that side. Mike, he's illuminating that picture.
I might be able to do both at once.
Well, yeah.
Does that work?
You know, the guys in Hollywood can do that with guns and knives and everything. Come on, Henry.
Scratch your head.
Yeah, let's start the laser show.
Yeah.
Working from this one?
Yeah.
At the very top of the watershed, in the Cayugas Creek watershed, we have two of our largest water users, the City of Thousand Oaks and the City of Simi Valley. And they are almost wholly dependent upon imported water for their potable water uses. And we import water, Cayugas does, into that basin, and they use it slightly, and as shown in this diagram, some of the urban discharges get percolated into groundwater. Some move further down. In the grand tradition of cities everywhere, they collect their wastewater and take it to the edge of the city and dump it into the next basin down. And that's illustrated here as well. And over time, those salts gradually move down and make their way to the ocean. The essence of the Salts and Nutrient Management Plan was to try to find a way of using the recycled water while still meeting the water quality objectives for the groundwater basins. And the point there is that as you take water out and put water in, to the extent that there's salt storage in the groundwater basin, you're either exceeding groundwater quality objectives, or if the groundwater currently is below the objectives, there's a certain amount of capacity in which loading can be added. But let's see how it works on the Cayugas Creek watershed. We have a slight problem, especially in the area within the GMA, is that a lot of our water in dry weather never makes it to the ocean. And so we have salts loading at the top of the watershed in Simi Valley, and all those total dissolved solids begin to accumulate, and it never quite gets there. And this is a picture of the Arroyo Las Posas where it sinks into the sand just north of Camarillo. And your board has had a presentation on the North Pleasant Valley desalter and are aware of the increasing salts and waters that are in that part of the North Pleasant Valley basin. And this is part of the reason why. Because as the salts are delivered in the top of the watershed, they never make it to the ocean. And in the GMA's own groundwater management plan, you see what the result of that is. Over time, those salts accumulate, and you get ever-increasing groundwater concentrations of TDS and chloride. To put a number on it, in the entire Cayugas Creek watershed, on a daily basis, if you accumulate all of the mass loading, you have 290 tons a day of salts coming in. And if you try to quantify the concentrations and flows going out, you find that going out we only have 25 tons a day. So this is bad news if you're a recycled water provider or someone that wants to develop recycled water. Because under the recycled water policy, you're going to be trying to deliver this water in a way that salts don't accumulate, and a groundwater basin was able to take the salts accumulated and not violate water quality objectives.
Let me back up for a second, if I may. Just
Yes.
290 tons a day, that's almost 600,000 pounds.
105,000 tons.
And this,
Well, it's 600. Well, I know what the takeoff weight of an airplane is, and that's pretty heavy. That
would be hard to get
that
it
is
to
the
fly.
weight right there, just as a point of reference. That is the takeoff weight of a 767 a day. How did you calculate that?
This was a calculation that was drawn from the technical documents that the Regional Water Quality Control Board And essentially what you take is the average daily deliveries of imported water from Northern California, groundwater that is being drawn from areas that are not in direct recharge, deep groundwater that is essentially bringing a salts import from a different period of time, as well as deliveries from United into the Oxnard Plain.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
So then the same computation fund is used for the salts going out?
Salts going out is the average flow and concentrations of the water that exits the watershed at Highway 1, not before you get into the tidal zone, but essentially the TDS and the flows that make it down to the ocean. It does not include subsurface flows, and there's probably some export on that in areas where there is offshore flow.
That's a lot of salt.
Okay, I in my little pea brain, I'm not going to try to be the engineer. It just, I find it hard to believe that in excess of 500,000 pounds a day, how many pounds of salt in an acre foot of water? I mean,
it depends on the concentration.
Well, obviously.
Right.
But
Imported water.
But what kind of water volume has to happen to produce that per day? Has to have some kind of water volume per day, and is that water volume consistent with what's actually moving up in that area?
If it's the pleasure of the board, I can provide the technical documents for you.
Okay,
but
you guys are all satisfied that in fact is a valid number. It just
yes.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sitting here trying to run through it. I think it's 25,000 ton a year is the calcs I had, and in the 50 years of existence that Cayugas has been bringing water through the tunnel, that accounts that we have imported 1 million dry tons of sodium chloride into this county by way of that tunnel.
What has to be?
And I was trying to work
1 million tons. Okay.
1 million tons. And that brings me to my favorite subject, and that is if Jerry Brown gets his tunnels, we're going to have 75 milligrams per liter less salt coming in, because that's the difference of the water we get based on those guys in the Delta forcing us to swallow seawater.
Okay.
So he's right on the money, I think.
Okay, all right. If I see heads nodding up and down in the back that this is in fact a valid number, it just... Whoa.
Mind-boggling.
Beyond mind-boggling, because this whole thing was caused by the farmers in the Delta so addicted to fresh water since Shasta was built that they don't want to give it up. They're fighting Jerry Brown tooth and nail. Charlotte, I've been to Shasta, chloride of 5. I've been to Orville, chloride of 6. I've been to American River at Howe Avenue, chloride of 3. Below the sewer outlet of the city of Sacramento, at Clarksburg, right exactly where the northernmost of the 3 pumps are going to be, chloride of 5. Our average chloride coming in here now is from 60 to 90, or say an average of 75. So there'll be at least 70 milligrams per liter difference, just if we overcome the opposition Jerry Brown's having to the tunnels.
This is a pet issue for Mike, because I have heard this issue at least seven times. So, but he's right. I mean, it's just shocking. Anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but that number in my order of magnitude is a 767-400 bump every single day, and that is a big airplane.
So that's a big salt shaker.
Exactly. It goes to the chair's point at the very beginning of the presentation that it looks like a giant payload on a rocket.
Yeah.
And that you should be shocked is a good thing, because it's a huge problem, and it is something that the watershed has been dealing with, and Cayugas and its purveyors have invested tens of millions of dollars in providing a salinity management pipeline to deal with some of these issues.
Okay.
So we're on the right track, that we know that this is a problem. But similar to your shock and almost incredulousness, the state recycled water policy wasn't really designed to deal with this type of situation. And when it was initially in draft form, the state policy was going to require a salts balance on a basin-by-basin basis. And so Simi Basin would need to have a salts balance, and East Las Posas would have to have a salts balance, and South Las Posas would have to have a salts balance, and Pleasant Valley Basin would have to have a salts balance. And by that time, we were already somewhat experienced in dealing with this on the watershed basis, and we were successful, as that policy was being developed, to get written into the policy the opportunity to manage salts on a watershed-wide basis. And that is really existing and a key cornerstone for the existing watershed scale planning. If we had to do it on a basin-by-basin situation with all the loading happening at the very top of the watershed, and the solution, the brine line, essentially starting at the very bottom of the watershed, there's a tragic disconnection between the problem and the solution, and we would simply not be able to recycle water in under the recycled water plan. In addition, there are elements of the recycled water policy that suggest that a regional framework would be useful. The recycled water policy identifies that if you have a functionally equivalent regional board approved element, that may substitute for portions of the salts and nutrient management plan. And on the Cayugas Creek watershed, we have those approved plans. We have a salts TMDL and we have a nutrient TMDL. The other piece is that the state recycled water policy requires that these plans be adopted as a basin amendment to the basin plan. And for consistency's sake, Cayugas Creek already has many existing TMDLs that we need to have consistency in the basin plan in order to have an orderly approach to water resources and water quality. And then finally, the recycled water policy foresaw that water, wastewater, and all contributors would fund locally controlled collaborative plan development. In this initial framework, we had financial support from the TMDL parties, which include all of those elements. And going forward, those parties themselves are determining how to do future funding, and it may simply be the POTWs, I believe, at this point. Correct. And Gerhard tells me correct, because I missed the Monday meeting where they discussed that. But there are other reasons why you need a regional framework. And in this map, what you see is the basins within the Cayugas Creek watershed and the outline of the GMA. And so this red line going all around through here, do we have anyone looking the other way? No, okay. Is the Cayugas Creek watershed boundary. And what you see in the dotted yellow line is the GMA boundary. And so you see that the GMA is a subset of the basins within the Cayugas Creek watershed. And what is interesting is we have 5 POTWs, only one of which is located in the GMA. And all the other POTWs that would be the source for recycled water are outside of the GMA. But given that, there is between the basins a lot of connections. And as part of the work that we did, we began to do schematics of how the surface and groundwater interactions were playing out in the watershed, in and outside of the GMA. And so management taking a watershed scale was really essential to really thoroughly map all the interactions that were happening in the watershed and manage the salts and nutrients effectively. Further, after you take this kind of natural surface and subsurface, there's a lot of pipes that are in the ground and a lot of people distributing water. And so it gets even more complicated at that. I I would like to take now the next hour to explain this diagram in detail, but instead of doing that...
There will be order in this room.
This simply shows this we know is accurate in broad detail. We know it needs refinement, but as part of this regional framework, we have to take a first crack at trying to see how all the salts move within our watershed so they might be managed. So I think that gives you a sense of why we were looking for a regional framework. What it does for the GMA is it really defines what's the most effective management scale. We were trying to find a scale at which the parties and the projects and the way the watershed actually worked could be effectively managed. And a basin-by-basin approach for salts and nutrient managements that move through a watershed simply wouldn't have worked. In the process, we have regional cooperation in terms of developing these water resources, being able to weigh in and work with the regional board on our approach early in the process is really reducing some of the regulatory barriers. The other piece that we're anxious to write into the plan is to have some amount of flexibility. Charlotte may have recalled when I said that these plans are going to be basin plan amendments. And depending on the degree to which you build in flexibility into that basin plan amendment, you either are going to be able to change and develop recycled water projects moving forward, or you're going to have to go back to the regional board and get a basin plan amendment if you want to change your plan. And our preference is to build that flexibility in beforehand, especially since within the GMA, you have many projects that cross watersheds. And so if someone like the City of Oxnard has a wonderful program and it's included in the Santa Clara River Salt and Nutrient Management Plan, and it wants to move water into the Cayugas Creek watershed, and someone says, oh, it's a great idea, all we need is 2 basin plan amendments and you're good to go, I think you're going to find that it's going to be very discouraging for the development of recycled water in this county. So our approach is to try to flesh out some of these hurdles and address them early. And finally, it's going to facilitate new water resources, which is what the supply side of the GMA is probably all about. And a key component of the export of salts is the Cayugas Municipal Water District Salinity Management Pipeline. And you see here in the red stars desalters and salt exports that are currently in the process, and in the blue you see some that are further out in the future. The ability to export salts in this watershed opens the door for the ability to use recycled water and hit that balance in terms of salt equilibrium. Something new that some of you may not have seen on this is that we're showing a branch going down the Santa Rosa Valley. This is preliminary at this time. It hasn't been decided by our board of directors. But as we look to the future and try to find how best to manage salts in order to increase water supplies and water supply reliability, this is what we're looking at. And what you're looking at in terms of water resources, this isn't quite as staggering a number, Chair, as the salts, but you're looking at 40,000 acre-feet of new developed water on this map alone. And that's a significant contribution to the water supply picture in Ventura County. So where do we go from here? We have a draft plan. I've been working with Gerhardt. We will be requesting a small extension. I think we're substantially complete with the framework, but I want to make sure that we dot all the I's and cross the T's and getting the documentation required under the agreement. And we should be able to wrap that up in a couple months. And then finally, a big thank you to your board and to the GMA staff. This program of providing seed money to help facilitate programs and planning that facilitates resource development in the GMA, I think is a very good program. And the people that have worked with you on this program, certainly thank you.
Thank you, Henry. Anybody in the audience have any questions? Members have any questions?
question on that.
Oh, Brian. Brian, yeah.
The reported water is about half a ton per acre foot.
It's about, say it again?
Half a ton of salt per acre foot for reported water.
Okay. All right. Well, then it's a lot more salt than I thought it would be. Okay. 1,000 pounds. Okay. Anybody else? Any members? Thank you, Henry.
Can we sell the salt?
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Very good. Let's deal with action item number 6.
Chair Mulhart, board members, Gerhard Hubner again. I'll be presenting this item. I have a very, very short presentation, and then I'll be open up to questions. Let's just jump right into it. As you know, at your April board meeting, staff presented a study session on the draft fiscal 13-14 annual work plan and budget. This was also discussed at the fiscal committee. I want to thank Director Borchard and Director Mulhart for your participation in getting us to this point today. There was a recommendation for approval. At your last board meeting, if you recall, you did direct us to schedule this final adoption for your consideration today at this May meeting. To date, we've received no requests for changes either to the fiscal 13-14 budget or the work plans spreadsheets that have been received. Therefore, what you see before you in the packet today is unchanged from the previous board meeting.
Okay.
With that, of course, at your discretion, any changes, but we do recommend you adopt the fiscal year 13-14 final work plan and budget, and be happy to answer any questions.
Okay. Dave.
Chair, I requested Gerhard move this off the consent agenda just so that if any public members had any questions or had an opportunity to address the issue
Okay.
one last time, but
Okay.
I've got no issues.
All right. Any member have any issues? Anybody in the audience have any issues? Can we have a motion? Yeah, a motion to adopt the... Yeah, considering a motion to adopt fiscal year 2013-2014 annual work plan and budget.
So moved.
All right, the motion.
Second.
And a second. Any other discussion? Can we have a roll call, please?
I just wanted to say good job.
Yeah. Good,
And
good,
it certainly took a lot of discussion out of the board to have you guys do it in committee.
It was our pleasure beating up on staff at the appropriate time, I want you to know.
So the committees work.
Well, at least we worked in that case.
And that committee worked.
Yeah, I'm not, let's not get too nuts here. Roll call, please.
Chair Mulhart?
Yes.
Director Craven?
Yes.
Director Zaragoza?
Yes.
Director Kelly?
Yes.
Director Borchard?
Yes.
By the way, for the record, alternate Neil Andrews came in some time ago, and I forgot to mention, so be sure he's down. There's Neil. Yeah.
And thank you very much.
Okay, all
I
right,
think this
let's
is
go
a
to
record
item
for-
number 8, A. You want to do A and B together, or how you want to do this?
I plan on doing 8A quickly and 8B
Okay.
quickly.
All right.
Good afternoon, Chair Mulhart and members of the board. For the record, my name is Rick Virgutz. I'll be presenting item number 8A today and then shortly following up with item number 8B. I have two short presentations. Item AA is the proposed ordinance 8.7, an ordinance to amend the Fox Canyon Groundwater Management Agency Ordinance Code. The agency's enabling legislation allows for 1.5% interest on unpaid extraction charges. SB 747 amended the enabling legislation to allow imposition of surcharges and also a late penalty on those surcharges, the unpaid surcharges. So the current ordinance code includes those and some extra things. It includes a late penalty on extraction charges and caps on the late penalty. So AB 2995 and SB 747 are clear with respect to interest and penalties, but the ordinance code is not. And so that's why we're proposing to update the ordinance code. The resulting lack of clarity results in things becoming overcomplicated and inefficient. and inconsistent. So keep in mind, we want operators and staff to be able to quickly summarize how to calculate the correct interest and penalties if required. And so if we're not able to do that, that creates difficulties. And just some specific examples regarding interest and late penalties. So the ordinance code imposes interest and a late penalty on unpaid extraction charges. Note, the legislation doesn't allow that. It doesn't allow late penalties on extraction charges. However, our ordinance code requires it. On B, interest, it imposes interest on unpaid non-metered water use fee and a late penalty on unpaid surcharges. The ordinance code is not clear what the start date is for the interest and late penalty charges. It uses 4 terms throughout the ordinance code for that start date. It creates confusion. Billing date, postmark date, due and payable date, and due date. 3, the ordinance code language regarding what interest and late penalty is charged against is not clear. For extraction charges, it says the interest is applied to a charge. For the late penalty, the late penalty is applied to an original charge, an extraction charge, and an unsatisfied extraction charge. Then we have similar issues with the non-metered water use fee. It's applied to a delinquent extraction charge, and with the surcharge, it's applied to an unsatisfied extraction surcharge and an extraction surcharge. So the language is a little bit jumbled together and confusing. And also regarding how to calculate the late penalty is also not real clear. The ordinance code has a 100% cap on the original charge or surcharge paid within 60 days. And you might recall from reading the staff report, that's mathematically not possible to reach that 100% cap within the 60 days. It has a 200% cap on the original penalty due. So now we're stepping away from the original charges, going to original penalties, so there's a difference there. And it's just not well suited for self-reporting. It becomes to get very complicated very quickly, and I don't think that's the intent, especially with a self-reporting system like what we have. So we brought this up to the Operations Committee, and I think this was another success of the committee process. We discussed these issues in November and February, and they guided development of the proposed ordinance code change before you today and recommends that the board consider it. The ordinance update also makes reference to a section 8.5 now in the proposed ordinance code, and that 8.5 will make reference to a resolution where civil penalties are clarified and put together in one document. Also important for things like self-reporting, we can direct operators and owners to one single resolution that your board adopts describing what the civil penalties are for non-compliance issues. So key ordinance code changes, we're now using one term for a due date. The late penalty is removed from the groundwater extraction charge. Non-metered water use fee is now clearly an extraction charge. The late penalty caps are removed and just merely replaced by what SB 747 says. And Section 8.5 is added, making reference to specific civil penalty and also penalty adjustment criteria, which is the subject of today's item 8B. And our recommendation is that your board adopt Ordinance 8.7.
Okay, Mike, what are the operations?
Yeah, Supervisor Bennett and I met on this twice, and we concurred with it. Mr. Bennett was going to come back later with any objections if he found them more, and he has not, to my knowledge. So I think we approve it, certainly.
And I also had the opportunity to work with you on that a while back, so.
Exactly.
Okay. Any members have any questions?
Chairman Mulhart.
Yes.
Item 8A is a public hearing. So
it is.
As a reminder.
Okay. So at this point in time, let me open a public hearing dealing with item Ordinance 8.7 to amend the Fox County Groundwater Management Agency Ordinance Code, item 8A. Anybody in the audience? Going once. Going 3 times. Okay. Any member or anything? All right, I'm closing the public hearing on item 8.7, or rather 8.A.
We make a motion out of...
All right, so Al, we can make the motion now?
Yes.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we adopt ordinance code 8.7 as provided,
And
as item 8A.
I'll second that.
Okay, a motion and a second. Any other discussion? Roll call, please.
Chair Mulhart?
Yes.
Director Craven?
Yes.
Director Zaragoza?
Yes.
Director Kelly?
Yes.
Director Borchard?
Yes.
Okay, let's deal with item 8B. It's the same issue. Do we have to do a public hearing on item 8B?
No.
Okay. All right, so let's go through this one real quick. This is item 8B, all right?
Right. For the record, Rick Virgutz presenting item 8B today, proposed resolution number 2013-01, incorporating civil penalties referenced in proposed ordinance code number 8.7. This item is merely a sort of a cleanup and a consolidation of some existing resolutions that your board has adopted in the past. Although we have added an additional civil penalty, which we discussed with the Operations Committee. The assessment of, or I could even say the threat of civil penalties has assisted the agency in the past in gaining operator compliance with the ordinance code. Examples are for the meter calibration program, failures to report, failure to file irrigation efficiency on time. So as part of clarifying the ordinance code, which you just heard about, we determined we should also clarify the civil penalties associated with various board actions. And the Operations Committee discussed this approach as well, and the proposed ordinance code, or excuse me, the ordinance code now will point to a single resolution adopted by your board that assesses civil penalties. Past approaches to assessing civil penalties varied slightly in terms of noticing and start dates and those types of things. Also, the executive officer did not have flexibility to modify those civil penalty amounts, though in some cases adjustments may have been warranted. The proposed resolution now uses consistent terms for mailing and active periods of these penalties. Essentially reprints the civil penalty values, but also uses a new daily rate, which was a suggestion that came through the Operations Committee. And it adds an additional civil penalty. So this is the one new penalty that this resolution would include for failure to notify the agency of a change in owner or operator per section 2.2 of the Ordinance Code. And it includes the adjustment criteria, penalty adjustment criteria. So the Operations Committee believes adding flexibility to apply a daily rate can be useful to encourage compliance, in addition to retaining the existing $500 civil penalty for failure to report extractions or pay fees, that type of thing, on time. We could assess that daily rate early on in the process to encourage operators to comply very quickly within a short time frame, and we retain that fallback position, which we've had for some time, which is the $500 civil penalty. A little background on the addition of the new civil penalty that I mentioned. It has to do with notifying the agency when changes in owners and operators take place. You'll recall we've briefed your board a number of times on following up with non-reporting operators. Many of these have direct linkages to us, meaning the GMA, simply not being notified when operators change. So the agency spends a lot of time doing detective work, and we can do that, but it's inefficient, and the agency's own ordinance code says that we're to be notified when those changes take place. So we found that eliminating that violation to the maximum extent possible will improve the operational efficiency. You'll notice I did mention some of the numbers up here. 44 of the non-reporters cannot be contacted because we don't have current contact information. So the purpose of this civil penalty is to get people to comply with that existing ordinance code requirement. A little bit on flexibility. The committee determined that some flexibility in penalty setting by the executive officer would be warranted. And we talked about different penalty structures, and ultimately we decided on a hybrid approach. We're recommending that your board adopt both the general criteria, which is adapted from the County Resource Management Agency, but not lose sight of the fact that in the GMA we've got a long track record of very specific reasons and excuses, if you will, why people aren't complying with the ordinance code. So we're also recommending that specific criteria be included based on experience that the agency has. A little bit on the general criteria: the culpability of the violator, the nature and persistence of the violator's failure to perform or comply with applicable agency regulations or direction to take corrective action, the length of time the violation has existed, and past history of violations is part of the criteria. Cooperation, on the next slide, the violator's cooperation with the agency is now part of the criteria. The financial burden of immediate compliance or corrective action on the violator is included, along with the extent of harm to the aquifer and the frequency of past violations, if any, and other factors as deemed relevant by the executive officer. So that's the general criteria. Then moving into the specific criteria, so based on our own experience, the resolution says that the executive officer may reduce the amount of the civil penalty when the person owing it may not have received the earlier request as a result of an agency error. So this would be an error on our part. This type of flexibility may help us avoid appeals in the future and gives the executive officer flexibility to make that call when the agency may make a mistake in notifying somebody. And the final bullet: the person who the civil penalty assessed has mitigating circumstances related to illness. We've seen a number of cases where this has occurred, where other family members become in charge of operations of the well and are trying to get up to speed. And I should say other families become in charge due to illnesses of our prior well operator. Last slide. The executive officer is not likely to reduce the amount of the civil penalty when the person owing it may not have received the earlier requests leading up to it as a result of not updating their contact information with the agency. And I could put as required there, but I didn't do that. The person owing it, according to the most up-to-date agency records, believed it was someone else's responsibility, and the failure to respond to earlier requests leading up to the imposition of the civil penalty was an oversight. So that concludes the specific criteria. And our recommendations is that your board adopt Resolution 2013-1. And I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
No, I concur with the recommendation.
Okay.
Any other comments or whatever?
Okay. Any members? Al, do we have to do a public hearing on this one too? Okay. Any members? Robert?
John, did you?
No, he didn't have any questions.
I actually have a quick question.
Okay.
I was at the Robert Aranio, Crestview Mutual Water Company. I was at the operations committee when staff was presenting this, and they came up with a problem that I certainly agree with them as a problem, and I feel their pain for in trying how to deal with it. And it has to do with owner of property notifying you when they buy the property or when they take ownership of a well. And I can certainly appreciate the difficulty in which that is, given the real life, everyday challenges I have within my own water utility for moving water stock. My question was, at the time, is there an ability for staff to be notified through the assessor's office that when a parcel that has a well on it changes hands or changes ownership, so that you can be given a heads up that maybe send out a hello letter, you need to talk to us? I didn't see that addressed anywhere, and I'm not sure if that's possible, because I think you know whereabouts the wells are and which APNs they're on. Can you flag them through your own county office in order to get some cooperation and help you with that problem?
Jeff or Gerhard, do you want to address that?
I don't know the answer to that question. We could certainly look into it.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea, and I think it's a question we got to look into. I'm not sure it has to be included in this resolution, but we could task staff with somehow putting it in the assessor's checklist to include some reference to notifying the appropriate agencies. I don't know. Yeah.
I mean, one way we could do it is by basically developing a query that provides the GMA the assessor parcel numbers where the wells are located. And then every quarter or as needed, we could potentially run a cross-check with the assessor's office to see if any of the ownership records for those parcels had changed. That then could trigger this notification.
I think the question that Bob is raising is a valid question. How we mechanically do it, whether it's triggered on our part or it's triggered on their part, I think is a valid issue. So,
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
You know, normally when you sell real estate or property and you exchange hands, there's a disclosure form, and then the title company then checks to make sure that all the permits are there and so forth, and maybe that's a trigger point when the title company or the disclosure or the realtor that's going to be selling that property, that's part of the disclosure.
It goes through escrow.
It goes through escrow. And then maybe that's when our people here in the county can let us know if that, that might trigger the...
I was wondering if Board Member Zaragoza could tell, what would happen if we recorded through the recorder's office each well site as it affects a particular property, and then in the title search it would immediately show up?
That's a possibility.
Because they search the title, and the current level of interest by the title companies is such that they don't find a damn thing much of the time.
Let's supposed to.
Yeah, let me stop for a second. Bob, your question has triggered quite a bit here. With regards to this ordinance, it assesses penalties for people that aren't making payments. We could assign a task to, so we don't have to put anything necessarily in here, but we could assign a task to staff to look into the optimum process to see if we can track some way to determine when title to a well changes. There's multiple ways of doing it. I don't know which one's the right one, but I don't think we need to have the mechanics included in this resolution.
Mr. Chairman, I'm wondering if we shouldn't maybe have a whole review of this kind of stuff, because we've discussed before people's properties changing and they don't even know it's in the Fox Canyon, and the title companies are not necessarily coming up on any disclosure list of that thing.
Yeah, but I was going to suggest that.
Okay, then let's do that.
That's a good point.
I didn't mean to trigger anything. I support this, and I understand it simply as a legacy question that I was asking.
Yes.
And just a matter of easing your own ability to get the work done, because I appreciate the difficulty in trying to keep track of parcels and how they move. And you've got a heads up over me as a private water utility and how to track these.
It's an excellent question, and it has ramifications in a variety of things we do. And I think the best answer is that becomes a topic for the Operations Committee. Okay. Anybody else have it? Yes, sir.
Thank you, Chair. Directors and staff, Steve Nash, resident. And should you perhaps try to define illness in order to avoid potential litigation based on perceived unfairness of the application on the part of the executive officer?
Okay.
A doctor's note. Possibly. Note.
You know what, it may be that to get this ordinance, this resolution on the books, we ought to do it. And if that problem pops up, then we'll have to maybe define it at that point in time. My sense is we need to get this change and get it done now. Mm-hmm. It's been reviewed by the Operations Committee way back as far as February, November. Mm-hmm. And then if in the process of enforcing this we come across that first individual that challenges on the term illness, then maybe we'll have to deal with it at that point. So that's kind of my sense on it.
And
get a doctor's report.
And Chair Mulhart, I believe the general criteria of culpability could be interpreted to include illness that would prevent an operator from complying. So I believe it is addressed, just
Okay.
not specifically with an excuse.
Okay. All right, any other questions on this? We have a motion.
In a second.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, we don't.
Just so I'm clear, maybe I could ask the Operations Committee, but the Section 1, this A, B, C, D, they list the $50 per day or 500. Is that 500 a not to exceed number, or is that, it's not clear to me in there.
That was meant as a not to exceed number to track with the earlier resolutions that included the $500.
Because I see there on letter D, it says $20 per day up to $2,300.
Right. Item D is for the failure to comply with the agency's meter calibration program, and that daily rate came up a little bit different. But
my question being, should we have some language in there that makes it clear that it's up to that $500, or?
How about the language, whichever is less?
I don't know what the rest of the board feels about that, but it was unclear to me when I read it.
In other words, is it a cap, or somebody just decides it's $50 a day, or we're going to charge you a flat $500?
Can amend it now.
That's what's not clear.
I understand. Well, we could add in or to a maximum of $500. My only thought with that is that with the discretion criteria, there's some discretion for the, well, actually that would probably work, because with the penalty adjustment criteria, we don't talk about escalating those civil penalties, and I don't think we need to do that. So I think if we put or a maximum of, that should work. In the event that something happened and we felt that those civil penalties weren't adequate, then I guess we would need to discuss it at that point.
And should that be on B and C as well?
I think it should be if we're going to do that.
A, B, and C.
Mm-hmm.
What if you use the term either $500 per day or $500, whichever is less? Whichever is less is what you're adding.
I think up to a maximum.
50 per day or 500.
$50 per day or 500, whichever is less.
Okay. My next question is...
Wait, let's make sure that Charlotte's saying it a different way.
I don't know. Do you want to change the
Al,
last one? I think that all four of them should be the same wording.
Right.
That's right.
I think the reason the wording is different for D than for A, B, and C is because it was carried over from a prior resolution. I don't believe there was an intent to treat it differently, so I would agree that the language should be consistent for A, B, C, and D. But I think A, B, and C are really what was intended, which is that it's either a flat penalty of $500 or a daily penalty. And if it's a daily penalty, it could exceed the $500. And the other comment is that Section C allows for the ability under those stated criteria to exceed the maximum amount of either a daily penalty or the one-time penalty. So
it seems that needs to be cleaned up to me, to make it clear. There was a lot of discussion in previous meetings about warning letters and when they were going to go out, and if we dispensed with all of that, is it just when you're late, you're due a penalty?
Part of the thing is that their lack of getting it wasn't.
Mike, you have to turn it.
Yeah. I'm not seeing the exact part yet, but it said that they were not exempt just because they had not gotten notice. But we fully intend to continue to send, and there was another notation somewhere in here, to send a return receipt requested, I believe, notice was in part of the discussions.
Just one example
Yes,
came to mind.
our intent is to
Right.
do our regular notification with the, so there'll
My
certainly
mind
be
was
at
still
least
back on
one
the-
of those letters that will go out. So we'll follow the procedures that we've had in the past.
So in essence, if somebody misses the due date on filing an application for efficiency allocation, the next day after that due date, they can be assessed $50 a day or $500. Is that the intent?
That is the intent, is to have that due date be tracked, and if they fail to do that or file the semi-annual statements or submit payment.
But the way he's stating it, you would say day one could be 500 at the discretion of the exec officer?
That is correct, because we modeled this after the past approaches, which was day one, it's $500. So what we've done is we followed that thought process with this.
And to add to that, the general criteria allows for an upward or a downward adjustment. So if somebody's a day late, staff would have the discretion to reduce it to zero.
And if he is 20 days late, what does it become?
Well, that would be determined based on the criteria that are set forth.
So
in the
50
resolution.
times 20 plus 500?
No, potentially.
Or
No,
prorated.
If it's a daily penalty, yeah.
Okay, hold on. Let me see if I can get some consensus here. We're going to go round and round. Items A, B, and C have basically the same language. Question to the members: Is $500 the limit of the penalty, or if they're 20 days late at $50 a day, is it $1,000 and just keeps growing? So what is your pleasure? Do you want to set a cap, or there is no cap, in which case $50 per day or $500, then you don't even need the $500 limit. It's just $50 a day, period.
Well, or maybe it should say $500 or $50 a day.
So the max being.
In other words,
Sounds
it's leaving,
good.
because the problem I think that staff is trying to address, and rightfully so, we still see that we're having a large amount of non-compliance. And we're trying to address the issue of getting people to send in their forms and do all the proper things.
All right. So what you're implying then is that if they're 20 days late, it's $1,000. You're okay with that?
At the XO's option.
Well, I understand that, but the beginning of the negotiation starts at $1,000. He can adjust it from there. But so if they're 30 days late, it's $1,500. If they're a month late, I mean, this number just keeps climbing. If that's the intent, then we got to change the language. If the intent is to cap it at $500,
So
you tell
to them, it didn't sound like it was intended to be a cap.
Director Borcher is correct. That was our understanding, is you had the 500 as sort of the floor, sort of the black and white, but any of those recalcitrants that go on, we wouldn't have to come back to the board again and again. They would get the message with the daily penalty, with, of course, the criteria that you would adopt. If there was some excuse, culpability, that can be adjusted in some manner.
It seems to me that if we capped it at $500, once they reach $500, there's not much reason to be hasty in reporting.
Correct.
okay, so let me go back to the question. Do you want a cap of 500?
No.
Do you want a floor of 500 as a minimum? Or do you want $50 per day, period, and with adjustments at the discretion by the criteria of the executive officer? Which of the three do you want? Dave?
My personal preference, I think, would be, as Gerhard explained it, start with the $500 with the ability for recalcitrant individuals that there's a bigger stick in the wings.
Okay, so you would want it to read in the amount of $50 per day, but not less than $500. That's how you would read it.
No. I think staff's intention here was that it was $500 was the initial penalty, or $50 a day in addition.
I think this is
So
getting
you
to
want
be...
it to say $500 or $50 a day? Is that what you...
I'm not describing it clear enough. Gerhard, you just said it very clearly.
It's, as we mentioned, if somebody misses their due date, and I'm just going to take this middle of the semi-annual statement, it's due by X date. If they miss that, there's a $500 civil penalty. Each additional day potentially could be $50 a day, depending on the discretion of the executive officer for any mitigating criteria that you set forth in the resolution.
That's very well said. Potentially. It's not mandated, $50 a day.
Okay.
It's potentially on the discretion of the executive
When do we need this on the books? When do you need this approved by? Because
yesterday, today.
I see Mike over here squirming.
This is becoming extremely more punitive than anything I had imagined, and I'm particularly offended by Section 1A. You're a day late and we knock you with $500. Now, is that going to be based on a postmark, Hubner, or is it going to be somebody walks through the door, or they phone you up and tell you I'm going to be late? I mean, what the hell? I agree.
I don't know, but I do know that if you pay your property taxes late,
That's right.
there's no discretion.
Well, and what Director Kelly is saying is the reason I brought all this up, because this seems quite a bit of a bigger step than where we had gone with this. We were very much about giving people chances, but I think consequently that took us 6-8 months down the road and having no reply.
Dr. Kelly, I have a suggestion that might help. You know, I agree with you. In the operations committee, we were thinking initially it would start out at a daily rate. Like you said, $50 a day. We wouldn't necessarily start out right at $500. So we chose $50 a day. Certainly that could escalate to $500. Maybe the way to move this forward, because I think we would like to, is say $50 per day, up to $500, and potentially more at the executive officer's.
I don't think we need to put the burden of penalties on Jeff's back. I think that just creates a giant monster. It needs to be spelled out. I think the question is very simple. Is the limit, we have set $500 as the limit for a long time, and it doesn't work. I get it. And so now we're negotiating with ourselves, frankly, and we shouldn't be negotiating with ourselves. We should be negotiating with people that don't pay their property taxes, close escrow, do all the other things. If you're late on your bank statement or whatever it is, you pay the penalty. So the question then to me, as I see it, is do you have a $500 cap? If you don't, it's $50 a day, period. And then it has all these mitigation factors. So Mike's concern that 1 day late costs you $50. Okay, I get it. 10 days late, you're right up to $500. And we've had a lot of people more than 10 days late. So it needs to grow. Because if that's what gets them into the door, and then we can apply mitigating factors to get them down to a reasonable number, that's some discretion the executive officer has, and I think that's okay.
Mr. Chairman, the discussion, for instance, in 1B, the application for the efficiency, people don't make the determination until after the year has closed. And so by the time they get the chance to make they're close to the borderline.
But it says when due.
Well, but that in itself is a nebulous answer. I mean, the
GMA statements, United's statement, is due 30 days after the close of the period. The GMA statement is not due until 45 days after the close of the period. So,
well,
I mean, there's
all I remember was that there was a good deal of discussion at a person and trying to make the decision of whether they're going to do it efficiency or not.
Right.
Was after the close.
So here we are right now. We either modify the language or we send it back to the operations folks to iron this out. What's your pleasure, folks?
Okay, you've convinced me, $50 a day.
John, what do you want to do?
That's good.
Mike, what do you want to do? You want to go back to the operations?
I just think that the 50 a day is okay, but to start out with the 500 for the first 1 day, that's just
okay. So if we go 50 a day,
then I would not be.
Because you want compliance.
Dave, what do you want to do?
And it's right, $50 a day, and then there also is discretion there that it can be modified.
In other sections, it talks about discretion.
You know,
Leave
somebody's a
paragraph
month
D.
late. Yeah, correct. Somebody's a month late, but it got buried on their desk, but they immediately comply when notified. Then I think that's a reason to.
Okay, so paragraph D is okay. If we modify paragraph A to put the period at the end of the word day, strike or $500, is everybody happy?
You're going to need to take out the word item as well.
Exactly.
In the amount of, take out
$50 per day.
$50 per day for all paragraphs A, B, and C. Agreed?
Mm-hmm.
Everybody okay with that? To the audience, any questions? Can I have a motion?
I move we adopt Resolution 2013-1 with the changes to Section 1A, B, C, and D, A, B, and C as detailed by the chairman.
Okay, that's the motion.
Second.
Okay, any other discussion? Staff understand what we just did here?
Yes,
okay.
we do.
Al, you okay with what we just did here?
Yes.
Okay, roll call, please.
Chair Mulhart?
Yes.
Director Craven?
Yes.
Director Zaragoza?
Yes.
Director Kelly?
Yes.
Director Borchard?
Yes.
Okay, we have administrative report.
Can I put in one more item, one more just thought process? And this is a big, this is a significant change in the penalty structure and how the agency is going to approach this issue of noncompliance. And it's probably necessary. Nevertheless, it would seem to me a simple letter or a postcard in a regular mailing with a copy of the resolution indicating this new penalty structure would go a long way in terms of letting the public understand that things have changed. Don't be late. Don't figure you can put this off for 6 months because it's going to be a big hit.
We hear you. Develop a newsletter?
Yes, exactly. That'll go out in July.
Very good.
July.
Okay, all righty, very good. All right, we have administrative reports. Any questions on the administrative reports?
Move to receive and file.
Second.
Any objection? Hearing no objection, we're going to adjourn to the June 26 regular board meeting. Just to reiterate for everybody here, my staff is going to schedule an executive committee meeting to deal with the issue that we talked about. Depending on what happens at that, we may have a special board meeting to deal with one item, and that is the GREAT program. If the timing is right, otherwise we'll deal with it at the June meeting. Okay? Any questions? Anybody? Thank you. Yeah. No. That's the problem. And I was